There is one type of person that every negotiator, every manipulator, every institution on earth is terrified of. Not the aggressive one. Not the intelligent one. The one who genuinely does not need what you're offering. You can't threaten them with loss, because they've already priced in losing everything. You can't tempt them with reward, because there's nothing you have that they're actually chasing. You can't shame them into compliance, because their sense of self was never borrowed from your approval in the first place. This isn't a fictional trait. It has a name in clinical psychology, a formula in game theory, and a cultural archetype that audiences worldwide can't stop watching. Today we take apart exactly how it works, and what it actually costs. Here's the uncomfortable starting point almost nobody wants to hear. Total self-reliance rarely begins as a strategy. It begins as a wound. Clinical psychology has a specific term for a person who has completely severed their reliance on others: hyperindependence. It isn't a personality preference. It's a defensive adaptation, forged most often by chronic instability during childhood. A caregiver who was erratic, absent, or emotionally unsafe often enough that the developing brain drew one permanent conclusion: dependency is danger. Once that conclusion sets in, the architecture of the brain itself begins to shift. The amygdala, your threat detection center, starts flagging closeness and reliance on others as a risk vector, not a comfort. The prefrontal cortex, instead of calmly weighing when trust is safe, locks into rigid, defensive management of every environment, every relationship, every potential vulnerability. Even the brain's internal reward system adjusts. The neurochemical pathways responsible for the warmth of connection, the ones triggered by intimacy, collaboration, being truly known by another person, quietly down, regulate. Not because the person consciously chooses coldness, but because their nervous system has calculated, correctly or not, that needing nobody is the cheapest, safest way to stay standing. This is where the story usually gets romanticized into something it isn't. The internet loves this archetype. Cold, sharp, untouchable. What it conveniently skips is the invoice attached to it. People who operate this way carry a documented pattern, elevated avoidance of attachment, and something researchers describe with a phrase that lands harder than most clinical language: emotional exile. The underlying logic is simple and brutal at the same time. If you eliminate reliance on anyone, you also eliminate the possibility of being betrayed, abandoned, or humiliated by them. It works. That's the disturbing part. It actually works, in the narrow sense of protecting against relational injury. But the cost compounds quietly in the background. Chronic burnout, flattened emotional range, and an isolation so total it stops even registering as loneliness. It just registers as normal. So before anyone chases this state as an aspiration, understand exactly what's being purchased with it. This isn't a superpower with no downside. It's a trade, and like every trade, somebody eventually notices what they gave up. Here's the part that explains why this trait, despite its cost, keeps winning in rooms full of people who have it together. On paper, negotiation theory has a concept that quietly governs almost every transaction, argument, or power struggle you've ever been part of. Your best alternative if the current deal falls apart. The stronger that alternative, the less power the other side has over you. Because the moment their offer drops below what you could get elsewhere, you simply leave. Most people never build that alternative. They stay in bad jobs, bad relationships, bad deals, because walking away feels more frightening than the mistreatment itself. That fear is precisely the leverage the other party is operating on, whether they admit it or not. Now picture the person whose walk-away price aligns with total autonomy, who requires no external capital, no validation, no social inclusion from the group in front of them. Every standard lever of control instantly stops functioning. Threatening loss does nothing. because they've already made peace with losing it. Offering reward does nothing, because they were never chasing what's being dangled. Even social pressure, the quiet, constant hum of, "What will people think?" does nothing, because their identity was never rented from the room's opinion to begin with. This is the exact mechanism by which a hurt nervous system and a strategic masterstroke end up looking identical from the outside. Same behavior, wildly different origin story. Break this down further, and you find 4 classic tools every institution, manager, and manipulator relies on to keep people compliant, and every single one collapses against a genuinely non-dependent actor. The threat of consequence collapses because someone with a strong exit plan simply exits before the consequence lands. The promise of reward collapses because reward only motivates someone who's still chasing something they don't already have. Institutional authority collapses because titles and hierarchies only carry weight for someone who still needs the institution's approval to feel legitimate. And social standing collapses hardest of all, because an actor who has already severed their need for the collective's opinion has nothing left for the collective to threaten. Strip all 4 levers away simultaneously, and you're no longer looking at a person embedded inside a system. You're looking at someone operating adjacent to it, observing the machinery, occasionally interacting with it, but never actually caught inside its gears. There's a reason a very specific type of character keeps resurfacing across modern fiction and pulling audiences in by the millions. The calculating, unreadable operator who treats every social interaction as a variable to be assessed rather than a bond to be nurtured. You know the type instantly, even without a name attached. They don't chase revenge. They don't chase approval. They don't leak the emotional tells that every other character in the story leaks constantly. They observe the entire social field like a board game, and they treat relationships as functional, useful in certain contexts, discarded without hesitation in others. Fiction turns what clinical literature would flag as a trauma adaptation into something audiences find magnetic, a kind of intellectual invincibility. And the appeal isn't random. In an era where economic stability feels unreliable and relational stability feels even less certain, the fantasy of a person who simply cannot be manipulated, cannot be wounded, cannot be maneuvered, that fantasy is doing real emotional work for the people watching it. But it's worth naming clearly what that fantasy is built from underneath the surface polish. The same neurological adaptation described earlier in far less flattering terms. The fiction just removes the burnout, the exile, the 3 a.m. hollowness that the real version tends to carry along with the power. Here's what makes this more than a character study. This exact pattern is showing up as a mass demographic shift, not just an individual coping mechanism. Look at the actual data on the American population right now. Over 4 in 10 adults are unpartnered. 1 in 5 report feeling lonely on any given day. Roughly 1 in 6 live in a state of near constant loneliness. Not occasional, but persistent, ongoing, treated as background noise rather than crisis. It gets sharper at the younger end of the population. Among American men between 15 and 34, 1 in 4 reported experiencing significant loneliness in just the previous day alone. That's not a statistic about occasional bad weeks. That's a generation quietly adapting to structural isolation as their baseline operating condition. What this means is that hyper-independence is no longer confined to individuals with specific developmental trauma histories. It's becoming a population-level default. Millions of people adopting extreme self-reliance not because a therapist would trace it back to one specific wound, but because the surrounding social infrastructure has simply stopped reliably providing connection in the first place. Put the psychology, the game theory, and the demographic data next to each other, and a pattern emerges that most people miss because they only ever look at one layer at a time. The trait that makes someone strategically untouchable and the trait that makes someone quietly isolated are, at the neurological level, the exact same trait. There is no clean line separating healthy self-sufficiency from defensive detachment. There's only a spectrum, and most people who romanticize the untouchable operator have no idea which end of it they're actually standing on. This doesn't mean the power is fake. It isn't. The strategic advantage is real, measurable, and functions exactly the way the theory describes. But treating total detachment as a permanent lifestyle, rather than a tool you can deploy and retract at will, is where the cost quietly starts outweighing the benefit. The goal was never to become permanently unreachable. The goal is to build a walk-away price strong enough that nobody can control you through fear or reward, while retaining the deliberate, chosen capacity to let specific people in when it actually serves you. This is the distinction almost nobody draws, and it's the one that separates the person who ends up strategically powerful from the person who ends up quietly hollow at 40, wondering why nobody ever got close. Autonomy that can be switched on for negotiation and switched off for connection is mastery. Autonomy that's permanently locked in the on position, whether you intended it or not, is a nervous system still running an old survival program that never got updated. The person who needs nothing cannot be controlled. That part is true, tested, and repeatable across every domain we just walked through. Psychology, negotiation theory, fiction, and now an entire generation's data. But cannot be controlled is not the same as cannot be reached. The strongest version of this isn't the character who never lets anyone in. It's the one with a walk-away price so absolute that letting someone in becomes a choice, made deliberately from strength instead of an unconscious default running quietly in the background of a life nobody chose on purpose. Build the leverage. Just don't forget to leave the door somewhere you can still find it.